Hello and welcome to this special series of Ingram Micro's B2B Tech Talk podcast, Coffee with Women in Tech, with your host, Harpreet. This is a show where incredible women in technology share their stories and successes. Why should a woman consider a career in tech? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this series, where you'll learn why tech is just the place to be for women.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Coffee with Women in Tech podcast. Today, I have with me Nima Green, former UK and Europe editor for CRN. Hello, Nima. How are you today?
Hi, I'm really well, thank you. And thank you for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, and I'm really excited to have you here. I've spoken to guests from a variety of disciplines on this podcast: marketing, sales, HR, but you're my first guest with a media background. So before we dive in, I'm curious to know, what does a day in your life look like?
That's a good question, and it can really vary. And I think a lot of people who might be listening who do have some sort of experience with media, this will resonate with them, that over the last 10 years, the industry has really changed. That in the past, people used to have to specialize more, and now we have to do more. You know, people have to be jack of all trades in some way, as well as trying to find a specialism.
How did you land with a career in media, and that too in technology industry? Tell us a bit about your career journey.
Okay, so the media question, that's more easy for me to answer in that I just had a lot of curiosity as a child. I really loved to travel. I really loved learning from people and talking to people. I'm definitely from a kind of more of an introvert background, really, where I prefer other people to be talking. So when I was moving through my education, it became pretty clear to me that media would be a really good place for me to go into and to be genuinely interested from a day-to-day perspective. And so that's what drove me into it. I lived in Australia for some time in Melbourne, and I was able to do my master's out there in journalism, and was able to be in some of the biggest newsrooms of the country there, and that was really a baptism of fire to get into the media industry. And but I was right in my perception that, you know, for someone who's curious, it really is. There's never a day that's exactly the same as the other. The nature of the world, it's so. There's just so much vitality, and there's so much change, and people are so layered and complex, and there's so many stories from speaking to people. You know, even if you go in and, you know, I tell all my reporters to be as prepared as they can for a conversation, but in the moment you have to really listen as well, and conversations can often go on different tangents in unexpected ways. So I was meeting a lot of people, I was talking to really interesting people. So I was even with all the challenges around deadlines and things, it was still very gratifying to start out in media. And then to move into tech, that was, you know, we've spoken before this podcast about how many women end up in this sector just by accident. And that was the case for me as well. I moved back to the UK, moved to London, and I'd been a freelancer, a general freelancer for a long time. In the previous life, I did some travel reporting, I did radio and broadcast. So I'd done quite a few disparate things as a freelancer, but I was looking for something where I could really specialize more into a very focused market and audience, if you like. And this job came up with CRN, and I'd not heard of it before, but when I went in to meet the team, it was pretty clear it was a really kind, really decent group of people. It was clear as well that the level of depth that I would be learning about going into the tech sector in the UK would be exactly what I was looking for. And I've learned so much since, and really loved it. It's been really good for me, I have to say.
Yeah, wow, it's interesting. It's interesting. Like everybody I've spoken to, you know, they always say they land in this industry accidentally, but once they do get here, it's fascinating. There's so much to learn, so much to grow, and it's quite a great experience being part of this industry. During your career, have you had anyone who's been quite a key part, such as mentors or coaches?
I have been shocked and very touched and heartened by the extent to which people outside of my company have been supportive to me in the tech sector. You know, being a journalist in this sector. And some of the first times I've met these senior execs, they weren't necessarily the easiest conversations. Sometimes as a journalist, you have to have interviews when things are going particularly well in a business. And so, the conversations can be a little bit tense sometimes, but that's the professional side. People realize it's just business, it's just journalism. But the individuals themselves have gone on over the 6 years to be, I was speaking to one of them yesterday, actually, and she describes herself as being, a cheerleader for other women in the tech sector, and I've really felt that from her as well. And there are several very senior women in our sector who, not from any searching from myself, but they have taken the initiative to reach out to me and to just give me encouragement over the years, to give feedback, to really help me along the way with confidence and a sense of giving me an outside sense of what I've achieved over the last 6 years. I think when you're really in something, in the midst of something, sometimes you need someone else to tell you to take a step back and see what you've done and where you've come from and progress that has been made. And I've had several of those women who have really, really helped me in that way, who have helped me to see things from a different perspective. And it's been completely invaluable. And I'm extremely grateful to them.
That's really heartening to know, and that's what we need, don't we? Those cheerleaders for supporting during our career journey, especially when you're new in an industry like technology.
Correct.
It can make a big difference in professional development, but as well as personal development.
I completely agree. I really, really agree. I think for people who are listening who are maybe earlier on in their career, this it's very commonly used, isn't it? Imposter syndrome. Even if you don't have it as developed as that, even if it's just sort of small self-doubt or a lack of scale in terms of where you see yourself going and the possibilities for you, I think that's very common in your early 20s, and especially women in their early 20s. You think, oh, maybe I can go this far, but I don't really see myself as a CEO, as a managing director, as an editor, or whatever it is. And having people who are already there turn around and say, I was like you too, and you need to have bigger dreams. You need to have a bigger sense of scale. That's probably the biggest personal change I've had from interacting with senior women in our industry, is that I think I almost used to see very senior people in my early 20s almost like a different breed of people. Like it was something where I couldn't imagine myself in that kind of scenario. And that's really changed a great deal for me over the last 10, 15 years. And I'm very grateful for that. And I try to do that now with the people who work in my teams. Whether they're men or they're women, I'm really seeing a very, it's kind of a sense of deja vu, really, that's those kind of doubts that are in them, and trying to dispel them, trying to give them a sense of a bigger scale of where they can go and their possibilities. And it's so rewarding. It's so rewarding to see them grow. It's brilliant.
Absolutely. I think mentoring is quite a rewarding process. Whether you are a mentor or a mentee, I think for both, I think it can be an amazing experience.
Absolutely.
So talking of, the career journey, and you've had such a long, fantastic and very interesting career.
Thank you.
What would you say are the top tips or big career lessons you've learned along the way?
Yeah. One of them is in the form of a mistake that I made through my 20s, and that I would really urge people to try not to make the same mistake. And that is that I really struggled with asking for help in my 20s. I almost equated it, not consciously, but certainly subconsciously, with weakness. And that's such an error. That's such a mistake. I really wish that I'd had the courage, the confidence to try and book a meeting in with, or write to, or email, whatever it is. Try to reach out to someone senior and say, look, this is where I am. These are my skills. This is what I would quite like to do, but I just want to pick the brains of someone who actually knows what they're talking about, who's already there. Would you mind having a coffee? Would you mind sending me some pointers, that kind of thing? And that is certainly something that I would say is a top tip. If people can take the initiative to do that, sometimes I have people ask me for support, ask me for questions, and you're never annoyed. Even if you're busy, you can see that someone's taken the initiative and they're passionate and they care. It's always going to be in your favor, even if they don't get back to you immediately. Don't be disheartened. That's a really top tip. Don't be afraid to ask for help. It certainly is not a weakness. It shows passion. It shows care. It shows drive, frankly. And these are all great things to have. So that's one of my top tips. Another one is around networking or building a network. Again, I was talking to a CEO yesterday, and she was saying, I'm really aware that for some people, networking is their worst nightmare, going to these events, and there are lots of people. Well, okay, if that's the case for you, then there are other ways now with networking. I think the pandemic has helped proliferate and expand the number of digital networks that are around in our sector. I've seen a lot of them. A lot of WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, whatever it is, of people who are growing in their industry, just starting in their industry, offering support, best practice, common challenges. Try to add yourself to one of those. Have a look what's available, because one, it might help you feel less of a sense of isolation if you are having some challenges, that there's a lot of strength in knowing you're not on your own, that it's not just you going through something. So that's they're not brand new tips or suggestions, but I think these two in particular are very, very impactful. They influence me now, and I wish I had been engaging with them much, much earlier in my career. So those are my two top tips.
Fantastic tips, and you're absolutely right. Things like asking for help or networking. If we can overcome kind of that hesitation, the initial hesitation, I think ultimately it can be very beneficial and shows good level of self-awareness as well.
Absolutely, that's a good way of putting it. Indeed.
So you have been in the technology industry for 6 years now. What do you like most about this industry? We always say we want to attract more women to tech. So if you could say something to them, why choose tech?
A good question. The first thing that comes to mind is how friendly and personable this sector is. I've worked across several sectors over the years when I was a freelance journalist, and it was one of the fastest things that hit me is, even with the pressure and the stress, the high-powered roles that a lot of people have in our sector, people are so human, so quick to have time for people. There's such a sense of camaraderie in the UK tech sector. It's really standout for someone who came in from the outside. Perhaps people who have been in the sector their whole career don't realize how great that is, and that it's not necessarily the norm in other sectors. So that's something that I would say is brilliant about the tech sector. Another thing I would say is how interesting it is, how much movement, how much vibrancy there is in our sector, because I think words like innovation are very strongly connected with technology, and for good reason. There's no sense of stagnation here. Even over the last 6 years, things have changed so much. And whether you go to the really large expos, the events in Barcelona, the events like the Microsoft and the AWS events all across the world, you can really see in these industry events that we have, that people are so excited about the work that they're doing, the possibilities of change, the innovation, the chances of changing the world in one way or another, or just coming up with different ways of doing things. It's definitely a sector where people don't just rest on their laurels, and I love that. And I wish that this was better communicated by ourselves to the pipeline to schools, there are so many more opportunities for people in this sector, other than just being a technical engineer or being interested in coding. Creative people are also so desperately needed in this industry. You know, if you can think creatively and outside of the box in a sector that thrives on innovation, that is essential. People who are good communicators, who are able to translate the technical aspects of those who are great at coding, those who are engineers, into real life business use cases, completely essential. And I wish that we as an industry communicated that better to the pipeline, so it becomes a much a bigger and more exciting prospect for people coming to the tech sector, because it's not one size fits all at all for our sector. And I've loved learning about that over the last few years.
Yes, and in technology is clearly one of the most innovative sectors, and absolutely. I mean, there is so much room here for those transferable skills, and I think we do need to communicate that and change that mindset as well. That technology is not just about technical roles. What more then can be done to make this industry even more diverse and inclusive?
That's $1 million question, isn't it? What I've seen has been particularly successful, have been those companies who have the resource and the will to go into schools and go into universities, because it's critical that the pipeline that we have coming into our sector is better informed, because at the moment they're making choices about where to move into a career, and they're not as informed as they could be, or they should be. So I know there are a lot of initiatives up and down the country where people are taking it upon themselves to do that. We had a small cohort of graduates who came and spoke on stage, and I was moderating a panel, and they were all about, I guess, 18, 19, 20, pretty young. And all of them spoke about how they would not be there if it wasn't for a company in our sector having gone to their school and talked to them about the potential. They were from very diverse backgrounds. And when I talk about diversity, I don't just mean that they were female. There was a range of ethnicities. There was a range of socioeconomic backgrounds as well. And a lot of what they were saying really resonated with me. I'm half Nepali. I know in the Nepalese side of my family, I never heard anyone talking about technology as a potential career path. And this just goes to show that there was proof right in front of our eyes of how effective, how much impacts can arise from people taking the initiative to go into schools. And I know that there are a few company CEOs who have told me that they encourage their staff on their volunteer days to use their volunteer days in that way, because it's volunteering, but it's also impactful to the future of their businesses as well. So that's something that I think is great. I'm also aware that there are some companies who are lobbying the government as well to have better communication as well from higher levels of the public sector, to better communicate the possibilities that can come from our sector. There was a very influential review, the Alison Rose review in 2019 by the current CEO of NatWest, of course. And she was asked by the government to look into why there are so few female entrepreneurs, particularly in the tech sector. And she looked into some of the ways that we can learn and change that. And she looked at other OECD countries, Australia, the Netherlands, Canada, and she found that the governments in those nations were doing different things than ours are doing. As an example, the Dutch have a system where the government encourages schools to have modules on entrepreneurship in schools much earlier.
Yeah.
So it's not an alien concept for young girls going through the school to think of themselves as entrepreneurs, because what the Rose Review found is that when they even interviewed female-owned companies, even those founders and CEOs still had a sense of, even when I was founding this business, I just didn't associate the word entrepreneur with myself. And I find that quite heartbreaking, actually. There has been progress since then. There's a Rose Review, if you like, every year, and there has been progress since then. There have been a lot more. I believe last year, 150,000 companies were founded by women in the UK. And that was twice the number that were founded in 2018. So there has been progress, but this is something that clearly, when governments can get involved in different ways, as is evidenced by the Dutch, by the Canadians, that the mindset of girls before they become women can be altered, and we can do away or chip away at some of the things like imposter syndrome earlier on in the pipeline. And I'm hopeful that we see faster progress on that. Certainly, there has been great progress over the last few years, and I think people shouldn't be too dispirited by the state of play. There has been change, but it would be great if it happened faster.
Yeah, that's very interesting point. Actually, it goes to show that much more impact can be created if that education and awareness happens a lot sooner than before they are making those career decisions. So before we end, I do have one final question. If there was one thing you would be able to do differently in your career if given a second chance, what would that be?
I know the answer straight away, and it's something I've touched on, which is to ask for help earlier, because I think I did have this sense that a professional woman, they kept their head down, they just got on with it. You don't complain, you just get on with it. And I, with maturity and with a bit more time, I've realized that I really should have asked for more input. I should have asked for more help. I should have gone to more networking events much, much sooner in my career, and just to have a greater sense of possibility, like all of the ways that we've been discussing in this podcast so far. I could have met with people who could have been those cheerleaders, could have been that support to me much, much earlier in my career. So I wish that would have been the case. I feel that perhaps I would have given myself less of a hard time as well. Some of us can be a little bit prone to that, especially if you've got a streak of being a little bit of a perfectionist, perhaps. I think that's pretty common. I wish that I had done that. But I try not to dwell on it too much. And that would be another point of advice if I could end on as well, is that it's also really natural to make mistakes as you move through your career. And it's best to try not to dwell on them, but rather than learn from them. And that's something that I've absolutely taken to heart. So I mentioned this idea of passing on what you learn to people who are coming through the ranks after you. And it's something that I say pretty early on to them, don't be afraid of asking for questions. Don't be afraid of making mistakes, because if you make a mistake, then we can learn together how that can be rectified. Whereas if you're not afraid to put your hand up and to be a bit bold, be a bit brave, then it's much harder to learn. So don't be afraid of making mistakes. Try not to make the ones I made, and pass on the things that you learn to the people who come after you. And that way we can really help each other as we move through our careers in the tech sector.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think as women, we can sometimes be very hard on ourselves. But I guess you're absolutely right. It's by asking for help and then helping someone else in turn is that we can ensure that we have those cheerleaders and we become those cheerleaders ourselves.
Absolutely. I love that we've ended on something so positive. So brilliant.
Thank you so much. It's been such a great pleasure talking to you today. Some really good advice. Thank you very much for joining me today. And big thank you to all our listeners. So bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this special series, Coffee with Women in Tech, from B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. This was hosted by Harpreet Narang. Tune in again to listen to another great story. To not miss an episode, subscribe today in your favorite podcast platform.